So at this point in Blender, you probably have a model, but it's kind of just this basic gray color that's kind of just the default material. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take this and we're going to apply some type of texture to it. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create that texture ourselves. So here in front of me, I have this kind of gray bottle thing that I just kind of whipped up real quick. So the first thing you're actually going to want to do before you start any type of texturing is you want to make sure that any of the modifiers that you have applied are actually completely applied. Right now, I can come in here and I can actually turn this off. So this is with subdivision off, this is with subdivision on. So you can see that there's a pretty dramatic difference going on. What's happening right now, if we go into edit mode, we still have the kind of lower poly mesh on here, and the subdivision is just kind of being applied to it. What we need to do is click this apply button. What that will do is that'll actually apply that and make that permanent. So when we go into tab, we'll notice that this has a lot more vertices and a lot more lines on it. Great. So now we've gotten to this point, the first thing we need to do before we can do any type of editing is actually do what's called a UV unwrap. So what we'll do is we'll go into here, and this is kind of what you're going to see in the UV unwrap area. So over here on the left side is going to be basically just a flat image, and what this is going to be is basically a map of your different vertices that you can then use to kind of guide the coloring of your actual model itself. So we'll zoom in here. We can see this is a pretty complicated object, but if we click on our select face view, click on something, press L, that'll select everything, and over here we can see that it's kind of being auto-populated over here. We're going to want to make a couple of adjustments to make sure that we can set this to exactly what we want to be. So first thing we'll do is we'll go to UV, click unwrap just to make sure that everything is actually unwrapped. It is. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually go into our selection tool, and then we're going to want to select edge select. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually define different basically seams for this. And you can kind of think of this as like unfolding something. Like think of this as an object that you want to make out of cardboard, and each one of these lines is going to be a fold or a cut. And what we need to do is cut everything so that it can be folded up real nice. So we'll start by coming in here, and I'm just gonna kind of shift into here, and then I'm going to select one of these edges right here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go select loops, and then just do edge loops, and that'll just select that entire edge loop for me, so this will go all the way around on the outside. And you can tell that all of them are selected because they will turn orange. The next thing I can do then is go UV and select mark seam, and you'll notice that it turns more of a red color. So what this is saying is right here you want to cut everything. The next thing I'll do is I'll just go in here and I'm going to select up this kind of side here. And you're going to want to just take your time with a lot of this. This is by far not one of the more glamorous sides of 3D modeling, but it is really important. So once you have that entire line up selected, what we're going to do is the same thing. We'll go to UV and mark seam. So now, if we select one of the, if we go back to our face select and select one of them and press L, you're going to notice that only this top area is selected. That's because this is basically one what we would call island. And then if we go UV unwrap, you'll see that we now have this kind of nice unwrap here. And you can see here, this is where our seam is going down the side, and then this is the seam around this bottom edge here. So what this is doing is basically slicing this off so that we can texture this slightly different. In this case, I want the cap to be a different color than the rest of the body, so that's why I opted to do this. From here then, we'll just kind of continue this process. We'll go down to the bottom, and we're going to reslice this. So the thing you want to keep in mind is you want to kind of make sure that this is sliced in a way that makes sense to actually fold everything in. So what we'll probably do is go down this edge here so that we can kind of unwrap this kind of cylindrical bottle area. And then we're going to do a kind of cut around the base here, because this base is going to look a little awkward if we just slice down the center without slicing this base off. But what you're kind of just looking for is you want to just kind of cut it into pieces that make sense. You know, if I was making this in real life and I was taking a piece of paper and folding it, I would probably want to have a seam here and then a seam here. And what I would do is I would cut out this base, then I would just wrap this kind of the side area around that, and then just glue all of that together. So kind of think of it from that standpoint. So what we'll go ahead and do is then just kind of select down here, and I'm going to opt to actually keep it in line with this seam here. So I'm going to actually kind of keep going down the same area. That's just kind of make this entire process easier. You can also multi-select. You have to make sure that you're in the edge select when you're doing this process. But I'm gonna go ahead and multi-select this and then just deselect everything I don't need. So once I have the seam marked, I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing and click Mark Seam. That'll turn it red, and then we're good to go. It's worth noting that I could have set this body seam to be anywhere along here, but I opted to keep it in line with this cap seam just for personal preference. It also helps me kind of just keep everything in line and keep everything together. The last thing then we'll do is we'll come down here, and where this seam ends, I'm going to select that one, go to select loops, and go edge loops, and that'll just select the ring around. And then what we'll go and ahead and do is click UV, mark seam, same as we've been doing. So now what we can do is we can, if we select a face, we can then press L. We can see that that's unwrapped. We'll go ahead and click UV unwrap. L. And you can see that that's unwrapped. If we press A and select everything, we can go UV unwrap. Take a moment. And then over here, we can kind of see everything in line. What we do want to make sure we do over here is we want to go to UV, and then we want to go to average island scale. What this is going to do is it's going to take all of these different what are called islands, which are just kind of individual separate kind of like slices here. So this is one island right here, and if we select it and then press L, we can select all of it, but this here is going to be the kind of bottle body here. Then this one down here is going to be the bottom cap or bottom base, and then this one here is going to be the top cap. And we can, select each one of these individually by selecting a face in this 3D view and pressing L. Or in this case, I'm going to select all of them and then see all of those over here. So what we'll do is UV average island scale, just to make sure that everything's averaged out. Looks like we already got that taken care of, so we should be good there. And then we're also going to want to select pack islands. And so what this is going to do is just going to make sure that everything is laid out in the best kind of arrangement possible, which again, it looks like it already took care of that for us, but you always want to just kind of go through and just double check both of those. From this point then, we have what is called our UV map. The next thing we'll probably want to do is we're going to want to go what's the next step? My brain is not working. So once we have this UV map taken care of and we've actually done all of the UV unwrapping, we can then go into the texture painting. So we do have a couple of different options with texture painting. The first one is actually full-on texture painting, which is a little misconceiving. You don't do like a ton of painting in this case all the time, but we have a couple of different things that we can do. The first thing I'm going to go to is over here on where it says mode material. I'm going to actually select single image. What this allows us to do is select an image or even create a new image that we want to use to actually kind of overlay on top of it. So the first thing we can do is we can go to open. I'm going to just quickly navigate to my downloads folder where I have this brick texture. Click open, and you'll see that it automatically just applies that brick texture to everything. Now, this doesn't really make sense for our bottle because this is a bottle and not a brick wall. So we won't be using this, but say you did have like a brick wall or something, you could apply this texture that way. The other thing that you'll notice is like these are going the wrong way. So if we wanted to actually adjust any of that, we would have to go back to UV editing, select a face, press L to select all of it, and then we would have to use our rotate tool to actually rotate this around the axis, and then we can use our movement tool to actually move this into another spot. We'll just do there for now. I'm going to undo most of this in just a second. And then if we go back to our texture paint, you'll notice that this has now been rotated and actually moved around. So you are able to actually move the kind of ordering and the orientation of these things using the UV map. The other thing that we are now able to do is actually paint over this. So say we wanted to do like a graffiti wall, we could do that. Draw some things onto this, and you'll notice that over here this image is actually editing. So I'm going to go back because these are actually changes that I didn't want to do. Let's readjust that. Cool. So we'll just kind of leave it like that. I'm going to make sure I'm back in texture paint. You can also get to the texture paint mode from not only just this tab, but where it says edit mode, you can go down to texture paint. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to remove this single image. The next thing that we could do is we could select new. I'll just name this color map, and then click. You can change the size and then click OK. And now what we can do is we can actually just paint on that as well. So what this allows us to do is kind of just paint our own custom textures onto this as needed. And the other thing that is worth noting is you can in a moment we will be exporting this, and you are able to take this image over here into something like Photoshop or Illustrator to actually adjust those as needed. The last way to do this, I'm going to go ahead and actually just clear out this image map that we just made, but the last way to do this is actually go to Vertex Paint. This is going to be a slightly different way of doing this. What we're doing is if I go into the edit mode, each one of these kind of points is going to be what's called a vertex. So what's going to end up happening is we're going to basically just be assigning these vertices different values. So like I'll say this one red, this one blue, and then it will blend in between for us, and then just make sure that each of these points is the color we set it to. So if we go back to Vertex Paint, we select a color, we can begin drawing, and you'll notice that this doesn't have as clean of a lines as the other one. You'll also notice that like right here where we have a vertex and then another vertex, this is blending from blue down to the gray. The other thing we can do is we can go to Paint, Set Vertex Colors, which is also Shift K, and that'll just automatically set this entire thing for us. So I'm going to opt to keep it like this for now. I'll go back and do some edits in another program in just a moment. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and set this entire thing to be blue because I want this to be like a water bottle. And then I'm going to select like a red for the cap and label. So I'll go ahead back into here. I'm just going to paint this cap. So you'll notice here that I accidentally got a little bit on the bottle. I could go back through and try to clean that up with the blue, but I'm actually not going to worry about it because when we bring this into Photoshop, I'm actually going to be able to sit down and actually edit all of this again. And I can actually like set it so that this entire cap is only red and this bottle is only blue. Do some kind of more fine-tuned edits there. So at the moment, I'm not going to worry too much about it. I am going to go ahead and actually paint in kind of like a label area here. What we could, in theory, do is, apart from just kind of painting this in, we could also go in to our UV maps, UV editor here, and we could actually make another seam as well if we wanted that to be more exact. So if we go back into our vertex paint mode, I'm going to actually back up a little bit. And I'm going to actually go ahead and just do that just because I want this to be a little cleaner. So you'll notice again, this isn't very clean. We have kind of this blending and blur. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the UV editing. And for the label, I'll select, again, make sure you're in edge select mode for this. I'll select there, then I'm going to go select loops, edge loops, and then I'll select that entire loop there. And then I'll just hold down shift and select that, and then go select loops, edge loops, and I'll select both of those. Then what we can do is we can go ahead and say we can go ahead and say UV mark seam, and that'll mark that as a seam again. And then if we select all of them, and go to UV unwrap, it'll go ahead and unwrap our little band here separately, and then we'll have a top and a bottom kind of section here and here for our actual bottle itself. Cool. So then if we go back to our texture painting mode, and then set this to be vertex paint, we can go ahead and actually just kind of paint in here. Does not need to be as exact now, because what we'll be doing is when we actually export the baked image, we can actually go in and just kind of finely tune this. So vertex painting is really great for rough detail. Same thing with the texture painting. It's really good for kind of more of a rough detail type of thing. It's not necessarily something that I use for really fine detail. Usually I'll bring it into something like Photoshop to do that. So now that we have this painted, how are we going to get it into Photoshop or another thing? Because we can't just kind of drag a 3D model in there and edit it the same way that we would like an image. What we're going to need to do is we're actually going to have to really quickly set up a shader that we can then use to actually export all of this out. So the first thing we're going to need to do is just pop back into our UV editing area here, and we have all of these. And what we're going to do is we're going to click New up here. And I'm going to go ahead and just name this Bottle UV. I'm going to set this to be 2084 or 2048, sorry. 2048 by 2048, just so I have a little higher resolution. And then click OK. That's then going to give us this kind of basic image here. Cool. This is now actually saved to kind of just this Blender file itself. This won't actually save it anywhere. In order to save it somewhere else, we do have to go Image and Save As. But right now, this won't do us much good because we're just going to see this kind of black blob of nothingness. These lines don't actually always appear. What we'll need to do in order to make sure that we see everything is we're going to need to go into shading, and then we're going to need to set up a basic shader for this. So we'll start by just clicking here to create a new basic material for ourselves. Then we'll go here to add, and we're going to go input, and then we're going to choose vertex color, and then just set this here. And down here, we're going to see this COL. Where that is coming from is if we go back to our texture paint and then select this, which is object data properties. Down here, you'll see vertex colors and you'll see COL. This was created the second that we went into vertex paint and actually started painting this thing, as this automatically was created. So I'm going to go ahead and just rename this to Bottle Vertex Colors, just so it's more descriptive. Again, whenever you're working in a 3D environment, it's really, really important that you maintain proper file management so you know what things are. You know, I could name this whatever I want, but if I were to just name this Color 6, that doesn't really tell me anything. So I renamed that, and then if we go back into shading and then click on this menu, we'll see Bottle Vertex Colors. So that did update. And we'll go ahead and select that. And then what we'll be doing is we're going to grab this node and we're going to be attaching it to some of these nodes over here. Really, we're only going to need the base color for this. And you'll notice up here in our preview window that just updated our actual color itself. There is a lot that you can do with this kind of shader area, and it's definitely worth your time to explore it. We won't be covering it in this demo though, so don't worry about trying to figure out what all of these things mean. For now, just know that the vertex color is all that we're going to be using here to actually set up our UV map itself. The other thing to know is that these materials won't necessarily transfer into Unity or other programs 100% properly. So what we're actually going to be doing right now is we're going to be texturing this, and then we're going to actually bring it into Unity to retexture it there and actually build the material there. But to do that, we do need this kind of base color map. The next thing we're going to do is we're going add another node. And you can do that a couple ways. We can click this add here, or we can go Shift A and then add it here. So once we hit Shift A, we're going to go to texture and choose image texture. And we'll just set that there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little drop down here, and it's going to be all of these different images that we have saved within this project. The brick texture, color map, render results, all those things. But what we want is that UV map that we made. So if you remember, I named mine bottle UV, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. We aren't actually going to be attaching this to anything, because we are actually going to basically be telling Blender itself to take all of the information that we've given it from this material and apply it onto that bottle UV and basically save over it. To do that, we're going to just make sure that we have this bottle selected, which is currently named cylinder in this scene collection. And then what we'll do is we're going to click on this little camera, which are the actual render settings. It's important to know that Blender actually has multiple different render engines built into it. And what that means is it basically just has multiple ways of actually rendering out some type of image. In this case, what we want to make sure we have selected is cycles, because cycles is the only one that actually supports what's called baking. And if we go down here, we're going to see this bake option. What baking does is it actually takes those materials that we've applied here, and it's going to bake it into a UV map. And so what it's doing is it's taking all that information and then just making this map for us. So what we'll do is we'll just click this bake button, and then down here you can see the progress bar. So once it's done baking, we can then go over to our UV edit, and we can see that there is actually a slight change here. We can see this color change. It's a little difficult to see with all these extra lines here. Don't worry, those don't actually show up, but you can kind of see the color in here. What we'll then go ahead and do is we're going to actually go image and save as. So now what we can do is we can navigate to wherever you've saved that uv.png, and we'll go ahead and just drag it into Photoshop or any image editing software to open it. And now you'll see that we have our actual image open in Photoshop. We can zoom in and adjust it. You'll see that this is where we had that accident with the red and whatnot. So what we're going to do is first I'm just going to go image, adjustments, brightness, contrast, and just bump this up a little bit just to adjust it where I like it. You can adjust these as needed depending on what your needs are. What we'll then go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. And what's helpful is making sure that you have only the things that you want selected, only the things you want to edit selected. So we'll go ahead to the, not that one, the quick selection tool. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of quickly select all of this in here. This is going to be the cap area. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to actually just fill this entire area with red. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this red color, then use the paint bucket tool to just fill in this kind of entire area. You could also take the brush tool, I'll scale this up a little bit, and just kind of paint everything in. So that'll give us our kind of red cap here. Then down here, you can see we have a little bit of red on our kind of bottle body. So what we'll go ahead and do is go to our quick selection tool, and then I'm just going to quickly select this entire area. I'll need to make sure I deselect this area as well if it's accidentally selected. I'll then select that blue, go back to the brush, and kind of just paint over that. Just so I get back to that nice blue color that I would like. The nice thing about having these islands too is you know that everything in this area is going to be corresponding to one kind of slicing area. That's why you always want to take those kind of areas that you're slicing apart together and seaming apart. Because in this case, I know this is my cap, and I know I want my cap to be entirely red. This is the bottom, I want that to be blue. these are the parts of the bottle that I want to be blue as well, and then this part I want to be that kind of red strip for the label itself. So we'll go ahead, just select our selection tool again. I'll need to deselect that one, make sure this is all selected. Again, select that blue color, then using my brush, just kind of go back over all of this. Just clear it through. The nice thing about being able to, at least in Photoshop, select like an individual island is I don't have to worry about accidentally painting any place that I want to be red or another color. So just keep that in mind. It's really helpful to just make sure you take your time actually selecting everything properly so you don't run into a problem where you accidentally color something you don't want to. So I'll go ahead and deselect all of this again down here. Make sure I select this strip. Take my time with the selection. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did with everything else. Select the red, go to the brush, and just make sure I fill all of that in. So the nice thing about Photoshop is being able to add in that kind of extra detail that you can't necessarily get from just kind of that vertex painting that we were doing. So I have just kind of this quick logo that I threw together for it. So I'm going to drop that in here. Go ahead and rotate this, and I want this to kind of sit on the label. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this down so that it kind of fits where I need it, and I'll just move it into place right about there. I might also want this on the cap, so I'll go ahead and select it, and then just just go over here and then just select duplicate layer. Name it copy, and then I'll just go ahead and drop it kind of in the center of that cap area. So what I can do then is I can go File, Save. I want to make sure that this is a PNG. I'm just going to save over the file that we have. So this bottle uv.png, click Save. Yes, I want to replace it. Yep, largest file size. Should be good. I'll go ahead and just close Photoshop. So once I have that UV image ready to go and exactly what I want it to be, I can then start bringing things into Unity to actually start building out those materials. So the first thing we'll do is I'm going to go to Models, and then I'm just going to go ahead and import that model. So you can do this a couple ways. You can, again, click Assets, and then choose Import New Asset, and then navigate to where that model is. But I'm going to opt to actually just click and drag this bottle into here. Unity does support Blender files natively, so you don't necessarily have to export as something else. Although if you are going to a different program, you might need to. The best option is to either use an FBX or an OBJ file. So in this case then, we've imported that. If we select a bottle here, we can see we have this bottle. We can also drag and drop it in here, but we'll notice that it's just kind of the default Unity shader, so it's just kind of this bland white color. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to actually build out the material using that UV that we just created. So we'll go into textures. I'm going to go ahead and import in that bottle UV PNG just by clicking and dragging. You would also go to File, Import, or Assets, Import. And so now we can see that we have this image here that we edited in Photoshop. But what we need to do is we can't just drag this image on there. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go to Material, our Material folder, go to Create Material, and then we're going to want to, I'm going to go ahead and just name this bottle. And here under the albedo area of our material, we're going to click on this little flywheel and just select the bottle UV. Double click to select that, and I can click and drag and apply that on here. It's cool. So now we have this bottle. We can affect it the same ways that we do other materials. So like in this case, it's probably going to be a little smooth and just a little metallic because it is going to be primarily plastic.